and financial development on firms' revenue, and also to try to understand how is this outcome. We also analyze export decisions, so the export decisions after there's a depreciation, and also the foreign debt choice. And then I'm going to show a two-period model to analyze optimal credit and trade decisions and the impact of these on these decisions on the exposition to the exchange rate. So in the period is going to be, the model, sorry, is going to be relatively simple. It's going to be a two-period small open economy. We're going to have heterogeneous firms along two dimensions, capital and productivity. And these firms are going to have two choices. In the first period, they're going to choose the credit market. They have two options of credit market. They could tap the domestic credit market, but we're going to assume that the domestic credit market is underdeveloped. Our definition of underdevelopment is going to be that there's going to be an exogenous spread between the borrowing and the saving interest rate. Or firms could also tap the international credit market. If they tap the international credit market, they're going to be facing an exogenous interest rate, but this loan is going to be in foreign currency. And also to access this market, they have to pay a fixed cost. So in the second period, we're going to have an exchange rate. This exchange rate is going to be risky. It's going to be observable in the second period. And once the firms observe the exchange rate, they're going to make an export decision. If they decide to export, they're going to pay a fixed cost. In data, what we're going to do is we're going to analyze firm level data. So our main result is going to be the impact of depreciation on the firm revenue. And what we find is that this impact of a depreciation depends on the financial development of the economy. If a firm is located in an economy that is more financially developed, a depreciation is going to causes revenue to increase. We also, to understand, to get like a grip of why we have the result, we also analyze two mechanisms. We analyze the impact of a depreciation on export decision. And what we find is that firms that are located in economies that are more financially developed, they have a higher probability of exporting when there's a depreciation. And we also find that firms that are located in economies with lower financial development have a higher share of debt in foreign currency. So in the model, we're going to use the model precisely to rationalize those results we find in the data. And what we're going to do then is we're going to analyze an equilibrium. We're going to analyze equilibria by playing along with this financial development. So our definition of financial development in the model is going to be this exogenous spread between the savings rate and the loan rate. And what we find is that when there's lower financial development, so that means when there's a higher spread, tapping the domestic credit market is going to be more expensive. More expensive in the sense that firms are going to be borrowing at a higher interest rate, but also firms that want to save are going to be saving at a lower interest rate. So this is going to cause that with less financial development, more firms are going to be tapping the international credit market. And what we're also going to find is that when there's less financial development, the export decision is going to depend more on the initial capital. That is, there's going to be misallocation, and hence like the title of the paper. In particular, what we're going to find is that firms that have higher productivity but lower initial capital are going to be firms that are going to be borrowing more. And since these firms are going to be borrowing more, they're going when they're located in less financially developed economies, this borrowing is going to be more expensive. So these are firms that are going to be smaller than they should have been. And then these firms are going to be exporting less when they're located in less financially developed economies than in the counterfactual. On the opposite side, when we have low productivity firms that have high initial capital, these firms are going to be more likely to export. And the reason is because these firms are going to be saving less. So they're going to be ending up being bigger than in the counterfactual, being located in a more financially developed economy. And hence being bigger is going to imply that they're going to be more likely to export. So what do we learn here? What we're going to learn, yes?
Just to understand what you're doing. So if I understood correctly, but please correct me if not, you're doing two things. You're comparing economies with different financial development, right? And you are also trying to see what the effect of a depreciation is on these economies.
So our motivation is to see why we have firms, what's the effect of a depreciation. And what we claim is that financial development plays an important role. And a
Okay.
reason, and the way we wanna see this is, which is consistent with what we see in data, is that financial development affects both the decision of which credit market to tap and also the export decision.
Okay. And then the next question, the depreciation of the exchange rate, this is a shock to the exchange rate, or does it come from a shock that also impacts the exchange rate?
This is
Because-
going to be a shock to the exchange rate. So exchange rate is going to be exogenous.
Okay.
It's going to be like a state variable. I mean, like an aggregate state variable too.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks.
So what we learned from the model is that when there's lower financial development, we're going to find that there are more firms that are positively exposed to exchange rate. That means more firms whose profits increase with a devaluation. And the reason we find this is that we're going to see that there are going to be more firms that are saving in foreign currency, so that depreciation makes the profits go up. And also, we're going to see that firms that save are more likely to export. So they're going to find more firms that are better off because they're saving in foreign currency and they're exporting more. But we're also going to see that there are going to be more firms that are negatively exposed to the exchange rate. That means we're going to see there are more firms whose profits decrease with depreciation. And the reason for this is that there are going to be more firms that are borrowing in foreign currency. And we're going to find that borrowers are less likely to export. So these are firms that have a higher cost because of their loan is in foreign currency. And also they have fewer income in foreign currency. And on net, we're going to find is that precisely the firms that are borrowing are going to be the most productive firms. So in aggregate, when there's less financial development, the economy as a whole is going to be more negatively exposed to the exchange rate. So a devaluation is going to cause that on average firms are going to be worse off. So maybe this is a good place to make a pit stop. So I don't know if there's any more some questions.
So I have a question here, just a clarifying question, David. So here, when you say that in lower financial development means a higher spread, domestic spread, right?
Yes.
And in that world, when you say borrowers are more productive firms, that means that more productive firms tend to be borrowers that do not export.
Okay, no. So let me yes. Yes, I don't know. The question is related to why, to the why.
Yeah.
Yes. So what we're gonna see is that the likeliness, the probability of a firm wanting to export is gonna be related to its size on the second period. So like bigger firms are gonna be more likely to export, and the reason is because since to export firms have to pay a fixed cost, then the bigger you are in the second period, the more likely you are to pay that fixed cost. And now when we have, so what I refer here like most productive firms, I mean like most productive firms that begin with a low initial capital. Since they're very productive, they're going to be more likely to borrow. But when there's less financial development, these firms are going to be borrowing less because it's more expensive to borrow, right? Either because they're facing a higher domestic rate or because now they have to pay a fixed cost to borrow from abroad.
Gotcha.
So these firms are going to be smaller than the following period, like having as a counterfactual more financial development, and that's why they're going to be less likely to export.
Makes sense. And the other question is just you don't have here entry or exit, right?
No. I mean, this is a two-period model. What I'm going to present today is a two-period model. We're working on a dynamic model to have like a quantitative, also a quantitative measure. What I'm going to show today is basically qualitative results. On the upside, I'm going to show some of the results I'm going to show today are analytical results.
Thank you.
Ask something about initially the firm are heterogeneous in terms of their productivity and the initial level of wealth or
Initial level of capital.
capital. So there is
Yes.
there is two variables that make them heterogeneous: capital, initial capital, and productivity. Okay.
Exactly.
David,
David?
sorry, this is Gustavo from the bank. Because here you have that essentially like when you have like a lower supply of domestic stores of value, essentially like you engage more in like saving and borrowing abroad. But I would imagine that when you have a less financially developed country, you also have a country that is that has a more closed capital account. Basically, you're less entwined with the rest of the world. I mean, I think that's really what happens. So I don't know how you can speak to that situation. Basically, that like even like the government like tries to do something to basically like segment the two financial markets, like the foreign and the domestic.
Yeah, so in our model, we're not gonna have like this measure of like the capital account because our exchange rate is exogenous. Like there's not gonna be like a balance of payments to be. But what we do have is endogenously, when there's less financial development, the domestic credit market is gonna be smaller in the sense that fewer firms are borrowing, fewer firms are saving.
Mm.
I don't know if that addresses your question.
No. I mean, I'm just trying to understand. I mean, what facts of the data you're trying to speak to, essentially, in the sense that you are having. I mean, you have a model that has some predictions, and you want. I mean, you want those predictions to have some correlate with what happens in the real world, right?
Oh yeah. So I'm gonna be more explicit about the data we have, but like just to be clear, what our motivation is why when there's a depreciation, some countries seem to be better off than others, right? Some firms in some countries a depreciation seems to be to increase production, and in others it seems to be worse off. So the mechanism we want to highlight is that at the firm level, when there's a depreciation, two things might be happening. Right? If a firm is tapping an international credit market and is borrowing from abroad, it might be worse off. But if a firm is exporting, then it might be better off. So like our empirical motivation is like firm level data. I mean, our big motivation to begin this project was like in aggregate. Why when Colombia experienced a very huge depreciation in 2015, for instance, I think Chile experienced a similar one. GDP didn't increase actually. It went a little bit down. So we went to a firm level data and see, okay, we want to address this question, like, okay, analyzing like from the firm level data.
I see. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
David? Hi, this is Juan from the bank. I have a question that's related to what Sofia asked a few minutes ago. So you're assuming the exchange rate is exogenous here. But
Yes.
we know it's an endogenous variable that's reacting to other underlying shocks. We also know that those underlying shocks are crucial for the effects of what happens to the exchange rate. So, for example, we know that the exchange rate pass-through depends on what the underlying shock is, right? So the effect of the exchange rate on prices depends on what the underlying shock that moves the exchange rate of what that shock is. So my question is, what do you think about that in the context of your analysis? It should be plausible that the effect of the exchange rate on firms depends on the underlying shock. And my question is, if you're seeing your result as sort of an average of the effect of many underlying shocks that might be affecting the exchange rate. Thanks.
Well, I think your question, is kind of addressing like a whole new agenda. So no, what we were thinking originally, like like in the initial steps of this project, we were thinking of, for instance, having the exchange rate being endogenous, and like being like the exogenous variable being, for instance, like the international interest rate. So we're thinking of financial conditions globally, particularly like in the US. The Fed tightens the interest rate, that causes moves in the exchange rate. Let's see what happens. So we see this project as maybe like a first step towards going there, just by taking the exchange rate as exogenous. Because it seems also that, because as you mentioned, there are so many, like the mechanisms that work through the exchange rate, that we want to keep it maybe like as simple as possible. And this seemed like a first step in that sense. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yep. Thank you.
David, sorry. This is Ernesto Pastor from the bank too. Very quick, on the same vein that the previous questions, probably I missed it. What is the empirical strategy for financial development?
So well, in the data what we're gonna use for financial development is this IMF measure that it has for economy wide, so that it kind of mixes both access to financial development and also how deep the financial the financial markets are in the economy. We did like some robustness checks just because this measure of financial development like encompasses like 6 measures with some robustness checks, and like that those empirical results seem to be kind of robust towards having like those different measures.
But ideally, if one wants to explore the causal effects, one would like to have something like a financial development shock. Is that correct?
And I don't know
And
if I follow.
I mean, here it's like a fixed effect, and it's the same thing that the same question that you got before is that how do we know that it's isolated effect related to some other underlying things that may be going on? So if at the end it's going to be an index country by country, it's going to be like a fixed effect, and not really. There is no instrument that you can use. I think. Is that correct?
Agree. So yeah. So what we're gonna show in the empirical data, I don't. I wouldn't feel confident claiming that there's causality there. But that precisely what our main result would be is our theoretical model, and in our model we can claim causality because we change one parameter and we see what changes. I don't
This
know
is
if that addresses your question.
says FD causes, so that's why I react to that.
Oh yeah, no, but this is a result from the theoretical model.
Okay, thanks.
David, I have a question regarding what are you assuming about how the exporters and importers are financing their export and import? Are you assuming some sort of trade credit?
So we're assuming that firms only produce with capital, and this capital is precisely what they to produce they can use their initial capital or they can borrow.
No, but for example, when you sell from Colombia to the US, are you gonna get paid immediately, or you're gonna have like an how do you call that in English? Accounts receivable with the importer in the US, and that
Okay, I mean,
most likely
yeah.
would be in dollars.
So yeah, in our model, I mean, in our model is a 2-period model. So yes, when you sell abroad, you get paid in dollars in period 2.
So you're not controlling for because all this that you're saying is basically if I sell abroad, I get an asset in dollars, and if I depreciate, I'm gonna get even more dollars. You're talking about that sort of
Even more
credit,
pesos. In more pesos. Yeah.
not with credit with the financial system.
Exactly. If I export and there's a depreciation, I get more pesos.
Yeah, but it's related to trade credit, not to credits with the financial system.
Exactly. When you sell abroad, it's not related to the financial system.
Okay.
So let me just go on to the presentation. So let me just let me just show like our empirical motivation. So we're gonna use firm level data from the World Bank Enterprise Service. This is some data we have since 2006 to analyze data on the share of foreign debt. We use a previous service from 2002 to 2005. As a measure of real exchange rate, we're gonna use a measure that is calculated by Darvas. In these results, a higher real exchange rate means an appreciation. And we're gonna use as a measure of financial development, we're gonna use the financial development index by the IMF. So we're gonna calculate this at the firm level data is revenue, and then the coefficients we want of interest are gonna be what with the effect of a depreciation, that's revenue. So what we're gonna have is the coefficient will be these two. So we wanna see when there's a depreciation, what happens with the revenues, and how is financial development, and what's the interaction with financial development of this effect. And what we find is is that the result of what happens with profits. Let me just show the following graph, which I think the result is more clear. So in this graph, what I'm showing is on the x-axis is going to be a financial development of the economy where the firm is located. On the y-axis is going to be the effects of revenue of an appreciation, because since our measure of the real exchange rate, a higher measure of real exchange rate means an appreciation. So that's what I'm showing here. And what I want to highlight here is that when there's less financial development, the revenue of firms increases after an appreciation. And this effect goes down with more financial development. So to put it in terms of what I want to present, when there's less financial development, the revenue of firms decreases after a depreciation. So this is just as a motivation, and then trying to look in data for possible mechanisms. What we also find is that firms in economies where there's more financial development are more likely to export during a devaluation. And we also find that firms located in economies with less financial development have a greater share of debt in foreign currency. So this motivates our model in the sense that this finding suggests that in economies with lower financial development, we're going to see on average that less firms are exporting and more firms are borrowing in foreign currency. And that might be a reason why, on average, firms are worse off when there's a depreciation.
David,
Yes?
I have a question there. So this part, is that like a motivation at the firm, country, time level, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And sector. But at the same time, it could be just because you have a bunch of certain kind of firms, many small firms or whatever. But does that map directly into the macro part? You know what I mean? Like you could see here the behavior you show, but then at the aggregate is the opposite. Just because a few firms actually explain the big bulk of what happens with aggregate revenue after an appreciation.
I mean, it could be. We try to control for a bunch of firm level controls and fixed effects to try to address that. We're also looking to see if these enterprise surveys, they have like this panel data. We're also, that's like some work in progress to see like in the panel data we see something. But I mean, in essence, you're right. We're seeing this. That's why I'm not claiming that this is the main result of the paper. Like we're just seeing that, look, the firm level data in economies, financial development seems to play a role. Now I'm going to show you a model to rationalize this fact and to understand why this is so. And precisely what we're seeing in our model, like going back to the preview of the results, is that it isn't that all firms are worse off in less financially developed economies after a depreciation. Actually, there are firms that are better off. Just that the firms that are worse off are the more productive ones. So that's why, on aggregate, the economy is worse off.
Ask you something here is you're assuming that all firms are affected by the same way, the revenues, by the same way by the real exchange rates within a country. We know that there are sectors that are tradable and not tradable. Why don't you see that, or to try to use the initial fraction of export by the firm level? Because my understanding is that for the case of a firm that is not exporting at all, they will be affected only by one channel. That will be the increase in the debt or whatever if the debt is in dollar, for example. So there could be quite different effect whether you are in a tradable sector or not tradable sector. And here but this is only a dummy. In some sense, is you want to have the interaction with the exchange rate or not? My point is that you should have the interaction with the exchange rate more than the fixed effect.
I see your point. Yeah. I think that would be like a good way to see if this holds more robustly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's all. Thanks.
David?
Let me go back to sorry, Sophia, just 1 second. This is Ernesto again. So Alejandro brought up something very interesting to me, at least, is that a general concern that you have been seeing in several comments is about indigeneity. Indigeneity either coming from the financial development or from the sources of the movement is in the exchange rates? Well, for the financial development, something you can is supposed to be this uniform within the country, and you have intra-country data, so you actually can show that the responsiveness of revenues to the exchange rates are going to be similar or different in a way that is going to support the empirical strategy that you are following.
I see what you're saying. Yes, I think Miguel, haven't we talked about something similar to exploit those wonderful databases that you have there? That is true. That is true. We could go on. So just to be clear, yeah, I mean, I realize there's a ton of endogeneity here. That's why I'm not claiming that this regression is showing causality. I'm just claiming that we're seeing this. Let me show you a theoretical model where we can interpret this correlation as a causality. But
Okay,
agree
but
that we could exploit more
Is
the
there
data.
any of the intra-country data you could use to shed some light on how we should think about this correlation?
So I mean, the way we're thinking is not precisely because I mean, I see your I mean, the short answer would be not today. How we could possibly do it, I will have to think better. I don't know if with this database that we're using, we could exploit that. It might be better just to like focus on like more like richer data within an economy. Then we will be losing like some of the old variation. I mean that, yeah, but, I mean, we will have to look carefully into that. Like not for today.
Okay, thanks.
David, very
Yes.
short question.
Yeah. Sorry.
Going back to the last, to what you were showing right before about the data. So what you see is that firms in more financially developed countries increase their probability of exporting
Yes.
when there is a depreciation. So
Yes.
that's extensive margin, right?
That's I mean, would be extensive margin because this is export or not.
So do you have any idea what happens with the intensive margin?
Not with this data. I mean, we have to look more closely in that. To be thin. I'm thinking is how that relates to the model. How we, I mean,
No,
to
because,
so
look,
sorry.
this is exactly thinking about the model. If you have that firms in less financially developed countries have more debt in foreign currency, this is what I understood. So whenever there is a depreciation, it's more expensive to borrow, and therefore they enter less. They paying the fixed cost of exporting is more expensive, right, for those firms. But it might be the case that for the ones that are already exporters, they have already paid the fixed cost. Then for those firms, the depreciation is still increasing their exports. You see what I mean? So you could have a difference between the extensive and intensive margins, at least for less financially developed economies.
I agree. So here, like, I mean, I think to address the comment, I think, yeah. So we were thinking here, I mean, this is a two-period model. So in that case, there's not continuing exporting firms because like
Right.
either they export or not. But for the dynamic model, that might potentially be an issue. So the assumption we're gonna make, we're making, and we had some discussions with Filippo, like how it displays along. So we're assuming that the fixed cost to export is paid in pesos. So this is causing like I think I'm gonna claim that this goes like against us, like in the sense like a result is like that's kind of a result is more robust with that assumption, in the sense that since the fixed cost, since to export firms are paying a fixed cost in pesos, we're making all along firms to be more likely to export when there's a devaluation. Right? So in that sense, I'm claiming that it's going against us in the sense that if we're still seeing that when there's less financial development, on aggregate, firms are worse off. So like they're negatively exposed on aggregate. This is taking into account that we're making them more likely to export.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, let me be precise when I go through the theoretical model.
But just to be clear, you don't have data you cannot
Or
check
your
what
initial
happened.
question. No, with this database, but I do think, I do think, yeah, from getting from these comments is, yeah, maybe it would be interesting to look to explore that more into detail with the cost that we will have to like focus like inside an economy because yeah, this database, I think like, yeah, as always, right? This is across countries, but yeah,
Right.
we cannot go that deeper in that, but we could also complement our data analysis, like maybe going deeper within an economy to see these types of things.
Okay, great, thanks.
So what I want to show you is a two-period small open economy. So there's going to be heterogeneity. We're going to have heterogeneous firms along two margins, capital and productivity. In the first period, firms are going to choose which credit market to tap. They're going to have two options. There's going to be a domestic credit market. The domestic credit market is going to be underdeveloped in the sense that there's going to be an exogenous spread, which we denote by rho, between the borrowing and the savings rate. So the borrowing and the savings rates are going to be endogenous. So just that exogenously, there's going to be this spread. Or they could also tap the international credit market at a fixed exchange rate, but this loan is going to be in foreign currency. And to tap this market, firms are going to need to pay a fixed cost. At the second period, the exchange rate is going to be realized, and firms are going to choose whether to sell only for the domestic market or to also export. But to export, firms need to pay a fixed cost. So this is just as in Melitz, as in the Melitz model. So we're going to assume there's, yes?
I'm so sorry. Just a small question. At the beginning, you have endogenous, there is a spread, no? Between the foreign and the domestic interest rate, a positive spread, right? It's cheaper to borrow
No.
abroad.
So no, the spread is going to be like within the economy between the savings rate and the borrowing rate.
That's I understand. That's the spread you mentioned there. But on top of that, you have another spread, like a domestic minus foreign.
No, you remember like the previous version I presented? No, now we don't have that.
There is so in equilibrium, both interest rate. So there is no UIP deviation basically.
There's what? Sorry.
No UIP deviation in the model.
There is going to be because there's because there's there's no exchange market there's no value of payments, right? So there's nothing that makes that like there can be arbitrage here.
Exactly. I'm just thinking about what's the incentive of borrowing abroad. It should be that it's cheaper, no?
Like from the point of view of the firm.
Yes.
The interest rate might be lower. Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, so the interest rate might be lower to borrow, and they could be higher to save, right? Because in the international credit market, R star is the interest rate of the market, so you can borrow or save at the interest rate.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
So yeah, there's also, yes, that's gonna be it, because from the results I'm gonna show you, on average, the exchange rate won't be changing. So yes, that's it. The level of the interest rate.
Thanks.
So we're going to assume that firms produce under monopolistic competition, and they're going to be facing these demands. So there's going to be a domestic demand and a foreign demand. In a work in progress, we're going to, in the fully dynamic model, which we're working on, this domestic demand is going to be endogenous, not for today. For today, this is going to be exogenous. And then I think I already mentioned this. Yeah, just to be clear with the notation. So once again, there's going to be two periods. In the first period, firms are going to be drawing their initial state, so the initial level of capital and their initial productivity, and they're going to choose how big they want to be in the second period and the credit market. They could tap the international credit market by facing an exogenous interest rate, but this loan is going to be in foreign currency, and to access this market, they're going to pay a fixed cost, which we're going to denote as FR. Or they could tap sorry?
Sorry, the assumption that domestic demand is exogenous is kind of very important here, right? This was the question by Alejandro, but basically, you could have some effect of depreciations that go in the same direction of the effect that you want to point out, but it's a whole different channel. So keeping that constant when you have the shock, it doesn't seem to be I mean, it seems that you're forcing kind of like the model to deliver you what you want, right? Like in relative
I'm
to
not
what the other mechanism delivers.
I'm not sure. I mean, it is true. It is true that the exchange rate is going to, if you have an exogenous and endogenous demand, the exchange rate is going to have an effect of this. I'm not sure if this is like playing in favor of us or against us, because
Yeah, that I agree.
I mean, because it could go either way. Because in the domestic demand, for instance, the profit of firms are going to be entering there, right? The price level, aggregate price level, is going to be entering there. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's going to actually like in a couple of exercises we did it could go either way. So just make
Yeah, no, I mean, I was thinking that perhaps like if you have a less financially developed country, like probably like low income, I mean, like a larger share of the population wouldn't have access to financial services maybe, so they're more like hand-to-mouth consumers, and they could be more affected to fluctuations in the real income. So if you have a depreciation of the exchange rate that affects them negatively in terms of the real income, they could like reduce demand importantly, like in a stronger way than in a more financially developed country, and then you would have an effect on revenues that goes through a different channel than the one that you want to advance here.
that would be true, but I mean, that would be like assuming like financial development has like this access component. So in a model, the firms are the ones that would be like the definition of financial development is the spread, like taking into account like we're assuming that all firms have access to financial market, just that the less financial development means that it's more expensive to access this financial market, right? So we will be analyzing that channel, but it is true that less financial development kind of by definition is forcing firms to pay more to access to access the financial market, either through interest rate or through paying the exchange the fixed cost to access the international market. But then again, I'm saying that it depends, because we could also think of a parameterization where we have a bunch of firms that want to save abroad. So it then says a depreciation with less financial development, this economy would be better off, right? Because like these more firms would be saving abroad. So that's why I'm saying that it would depend. Like it's not clear which effect it would go. Quantitatively, I think it's very relevant. That's why the dynamic version we're analyzing does include endogenous demand.
Okay, thank you.
So let me begin just like walking through the model to like the firm's problem, from backward induction. So let's think of a firm that is in the second period. So if the firm begins at the second period, we're assuming that production takes place only in the second period, and to produce, firms only use capital. So firms wake up in the second period, and they already chose how big they want to be. So this K prime is given in the second period, and they observe the exchange rate. So in that case, in the second period, firms have already chosen which credit market they tapped, and they already chose how big they are. They already chose K prime, and they already chose if they borrowed in pesos or in dollars. So the only choice that is left is whether to export or not. So they wake up, they observe K prime, they observe the exchange rate. So the choice there is how to split this K prime between domestic consumption, production for domestic consumption, or exports. And we're assuming that to export, they need to pay the fixed cost. So what we're going to do is that they're just going to compare what, given the exchange rate, which yields higher profits. So just to be more precise on the notation, at period 2, since firms already chose the credit market, potentially how much they borrowed would be different between which market they chose. And the reason is because if they borrowed in dollars, they will also need to borrow to pay for the fixed cost to access the international credit market. So in that sense, how big firms are and how much is borrowed or saved, because this could be negative, is also contingent on which credit market they tapped. So how do they choose whether to export or not? They're going to compare profits. If firms borrow from the domestic credit market, then they are going to be facing the interest rate they face is going to be it's going to depend on whether they borrowed or saved. So here's where the assumption of financial development is going to play a role. If the firms borrowed, they're going to be facing an interest rate RO, which is going to be endogenous. If firms saved, they're going to be facing an interest rate rho minus rho. And this rho is going to be exogenous. That's going to be a measure of financial development. On the other hand, if firms borrow from abroad, regardless of whether they borrowed or saved, they're going to be paying a fixed interest rate. The cost is going to be that loan or the return from those savings is going to depend on the exchange rate. So depending on whether they borrow domestically and firms choose only to produce domestically, their profits would be like this. The only source of income would be what they sell domestically. If they borrow abroad and they choose only to produce domestically, this is going to be the income. On the other hand, firms can also choose whether to export. If firms choose to export, that means they use less capital to sell for domestic consumption, and they use part of the capital to sell abroad. When they sell abroad, that income is going to be in dollars because they're selling abroad. So the exchange rate is going to be playing a role here. So firms are just going to compare which option gives a higher income, given that realization of the exchange rate. And then knowing along all the realization of the exchange rate, whether it's better to export or not, and period one, they're going to choose which credit market to tap. And the way they're going to choose is just the credit market that yields the greater profits, the higher profits. The higher expected profits, sorry. In the expectation taking with the exchange rate.
May I ask you something about the model here?
Sure.
There used to be in the past a lot of literature on that, but it was related also with the issue of to go to bankruptcy, because bankruptcy makes that the firm maximize a different firm that's make a concave or for the firm is maximize, even though that people are risk neutral. The fact that you are limited liabilities make that the utility function you will be facing will be not linear anymore, and that was the mechanism through which the effect to have debt in dollar or in peso, whether you are importing some inputs in or exporting. So this issue was a big part of the problem. Why do you think that now it's not so much the problem, the issue that's the bankruptcy issue? And I think you hear about paper Kevin Cohen and Robinson. There are some papers in the 2000s about that.
Well, I don't know if it's not. I mean, I don't know if it's not relevant. I think that. Well, like maybe my answer to that question would be, I don't know if that will necessarily be playing like in favor of a result, right? Because precisely what we're seeing in this model is that when there's more financial development, I mean, like the motivation to assume foreign exchange risk in our model has nothing to do with risk aversion. I want to claim that that's like a feature of our model, a feature of our model in the sense that when firms are assuming that firms might still want to assume. Let me make my ideas clear. Yeah, like firms. The reason why firms might want or not assume foreign exchange risk in this economy is not related to a risk aversion, but rather to financial development, and that's like the channel we want to push. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, but the issue that's my understanding that the fact that you reduce the impact, for example, the benefits, I think the key point, the benefit to try to match better your amount of export with your initial level of debt in dollars will be much higher if there is a risk or not to go bankrupt. So that's hedge. Many times you use the debt as a hedge for your exports. In your model, you are doing, I think, something like this also must be something in one part. But in the other way, when you have not some concavity in the utility, in the case of this model, the The concavity in the utility is coming from the facts that you have a bankrupt procedure. That's make you, that's the profits are flat in one moment, so equal to zero. So that's only my concern. Why this used to be a very important channel, okay, that's try to use export and as a way to hedge your amount of debt in dollars or vice versa. Okay, so that's my point.
No, I understand. Yeah, like my answer would be like, yeah, we're since we're going to we want to understand the role of financial development. If we had some kind of risk aversion, like being the reason that I want to be, like be introducing either partnership cost or the fact that like entrepreneurs are risk averse,
Huh?
we will have that risk aversion like across all economies, like across economies with all financial development levels, right? I'm not sure if that would be like playing against a result or like in favor of a result.
Okay, let me think about. Okay, but
But I agree that that may be something to think about. So yeah, an equilibrium in this economy is gonna be like fairly straightforward in the sense that yeah, we have like one price, the domestic interest rate. So an equilibrium in this economy is gonna be characterized by sets of firms and the interest rate, such that firms optimize and such that the sets are consistent with the choices of the firms. So by choices of firms, I mean which firms tap the domestic market and which tap the international credit market, and for which levels of foreign exchange rate firms want to export or not. And the interest rate is going to be clear in the domestic credit market. So now let me characterize this economy, this equilibrium. So the first result is going to be that we find that bigger firms, that means firms that in what I mean by bigger, I mean firms with greater capital in the second period are going to be more likely to export. And the reason why bigger firms are more likely to export is because of the fixed cost they need to pay to export. So since this is going to pay the firms to export, firms need to pay this fixed cost. The bigger they are, like the less expensive it is for those firms to pay the fixed cost. So in terms of analytically, what we find is that the bigger the firms are, the more realizations of exchange rate that make the firm find it optimal to export. And this is going to be an important result in the sense that precisely the effect of financial development on the export decision is going to be working through how big firms are in the second period in less financially developed economies. So to understand this economy, I'm going to like two exercises just to understand like the two margins, the two choices firms face. So in the first exercise, what I'm going to understand is I'm going to abstract from the export decision. So I'm going to assume that no firm exports. And I'm going to do this just to understand what drives a firm to tap the domestic credit market versus the international credit market. And what we're gonna find in this an exercise is that we're gonna have a benchmark. Our benchmark is gonna be all firms borrow domestically. That benchmark is gonna be what rho equals 0. And when rho increases, we're going to, this is some analytical results. We prove that it is more expensive for firms to borrow in the sense that the domestic credit market, the domestic interest rate is going to be increasing in rho, but also it's going to be more expensive for firms to save domestically in the sense that the interest rate minus the spread is going to be decreasing in rho. And I'm gonna claim here that misallocation is increasing in rho in the sense that the optimal credit market choice is going to depend more on the initial level of capital rather than just the productivity. And then a second exercise would be, okay, now let me understand the export decision. So let me abstract from the credit market. Let me assume that all firms borrow domestically, and let's see what's going to drive their export decision. And what we're gonna find here is that misallocation is also going to be increasing in financial development, in less financial development. So misallocation is going to be increasing in rho, in the sense that a higher level of rho is going to imply that the decision to export depends more on the initial level of capital rather than on the initial productivity. And then this is just analytical results. Then I'm going to let both channels play, and we're going to see the main result. So let me start with the first analytical result. That means like to analyze the credit market choice. So we're going to assume that we're going to abstract from the export decision. So let's assume that no firm exports. And we can also find parameter values such that in the benchmark model, a benchmark model being there's full financial development, so rho equals 0, the both interest rates are the same. And this is just so that we have this benchmark where all firms find it optimal to tap the domestic credit market. So now we can see what happens with that. That's not the case. So in that benchmark model, when there's full financial development, that means there's no wedge. We're gonna let me show you graphically the result. So this is in this case, there's no wedge. All firms face exactly the same domestic rate, either to borrow or to save domestically. And in this benchmark case, all firms find it optimal to tap the domestic credit market. So that's just at a benchmark, and just at a benchmark where we find this line above which firms want to borrow domestically and below which firms want to save. So the firms that want to borrow are the firms that are more productive and have lower initial capital. The firms that want to save are the firms that are less productive and have a higher level of initial capital. So now when there's a wedge, when there's financial underdevelopment, what we're going to see is that this wedge is going to be causing firms to neither save nor borrow domestically. So let me show you graphically that maybe that's more clear. This red line would be the benchmark case. When rho increases, we're going to see that there are going to be less firms that are going to find it optimal to borrow domestically. And the reason is because now it's more expensive to borrow. I'm going to assume that holds, then I'm going to prove that holds, but they're going to be facing a higher interest rate. So if they're going to be facing a higher interest rates, less firms are going to find it optimal to borrow domestically. And similar with savings. Savings is going to be more expensive in the sense that the return to savings are going to go down in rho. And there's also going to be this wedge appearing where firms find it optimal to neither borrow nor save. And when rho increases, that middle region of firms that are find it optimal to neither borrow nor save is going to be greater. Because these are firms that the interest rate to borrow is going to be too high, but the interest rate to save is going to be too low. So this is regarding if firms were considering the domestic credit market. Now let me analyze what will happen if firms were considering the international credit market. So in the international credit market, what we're going to see is that it's going to be similar to the benchmark case, like when rho equals 0. There's going to be a slight difference, and it's the fact that firms need to pay for the fixed cost to tap the international credit market. So this is going to cause that all firms that would borrow domestically are also going to be borrowing abroad. But it could be the case that a firm would want to save domestically, but we still want to borrow abroad because to tap the international credit market, it will need to pay for the fixed cost. And now let me analyze the decision. Like, okay, which firms find it optimal to borrow domestically, like to tap the international credit market or to tap the domestic credit market? So when rho equals 0, benchmark case, by construction in this exercise, all firms want to tap the domestic credit market. When there's a positive rho, what we're going to find is that the firms that are borrowing a lot or are saving a lot are the ones that find it better to tap the international credit market. And the reason for this is fairly straightforward in the sense that if firms want to borrow a lot or want to save a lot, these are the firms that find it optimal to pay the fixed cost. So like that average cost is lower. So they find it optimal to do that. So if with a positive level rho, we're gonna find like this map. These high productive with low initial capital firms are gonna be tapping the international credit market. These low productive with high initial capital are gonna be saving abroad. And then there's gonna be these middle ground firms that are borrowing. These are gonna be borrowing in the domestic credit market. These firms are gonna be saving in the domestic credit market, and there's gonna be this stripe of firms that are tapping the domestic credit market, but neither want to save nor borrow, like find optimal for B to P0. When B increases, what we're going to be finding is that more firms, so this line is going to be moving down. So more firms are want to borrow internationally. This line is going to be going up. So more firms want to save in the domestic credit market. And also, we're going to find more firms that find it optimal to neither borrow nor save in the domestic credit market. So in that sense, the domestic credit market shrinks a lot. So this small area are going to be the firms that are going to be borrowing domestically. This small area is going to be the firms that are going to be borrowing domestically. I said the same thing twice. Sorry. This small area is going to be the firms that are going to be borrowing domestically. This small area would be the firms that are going to save in domestically. So in terms of, okay, so this would be like a sketch of the proof of precisely why it's going to be more expensive both to save or to borrow domestically. So, but let me just skip that. So in terms of exposition to a foreign exchange rate, when we only analyze, yes.
I'm sorry, there's something I'm lost. So R raw, that's endogenous.
Yes.
And raw is your exogenous object that is gonna give us a wedge between R raw and raw. That the larger it is, the less financially developed the country is, right?
Yes.
So here when raw increases, R raw increases by more than. If raw increases by 1, R raw increases by more than 1.
No, by less than 1.
But in that case, yeah, exactly. So in that case, wouldn't the wedge go down and financial development actually increase, or I'm getting it?
So the wedge is raw, right? Because the wedge is the difference between the savings rate and the borrowing rate, right? So that wedge is increasing. Maybe what's not so obvious, at least before we did this, was whether that implies that the interest rate faced by borrowers is going to be increasing in raw, or if the interest rate faced by savers is going to be decreasing in raw.
Right.
Right. And what we find is that it is like under like some kind of fairly general conditions it is. So that's why like this would be like the inequality. So I don't know if I can type here. Here, maybe here. But basically with raw, what we find is that the savings rate is going to be greater the greater the raw is. But the borrowing rate, the interest rate faced by borrowers is going to be increasing in raw, but the interest rate faced by savers is going to be decreasing in raw.
Okay, yeah, I was just confused about what happened to aggregate savings, but okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So I mean, what is maybe like also not like also consistent with that being with raw being financial development is also that the market is much smaller. We're finding both less firms saving domestically and less firms borrowing domestically. So in this case, in terms of exposition to exchange rate, if we're only analyzing the like which credit market to tap, there are going to be 3 possibilities of exposition to exchange rate. When with a higher exchange rate, if a firm is saving abroad, then profits increase. With a higher exchange rate, if a firm is borrowing from abroad, then profits decrease. If the firm is tapping the domestic credit market, then profits don't change with the exchange rate. And graphically, what we're going to find is, in our benchmark case, all firms are tapping the domestic credit market. So in our benchmark case, there's no exposition to exchange rate. As the exchange, in economies with less financial development, we're starting to see more exposition. So we're starting to see these firms that are worse off under the depreciation, because these are the firms that are going to be saving abroad, and these firms that are going to be the firms that are going to be better off under devaluation, because these firms are going to be the ones that are saving abroad. And with greater raw, we're going to find both more firms that are worse off with appreciation, like negatively exposed to exchange rate, and more firms that are positively exposed to exchange rate. In this case, we're also seeing that the firms that are worse off are going to be precisely the more productive firms, because these are the firms that are more likely to borrow, and with that depreciation they're worse off. Now let me analyze the export decision. So to analyze the export decision, I'm going to abstract from the credit choice, and I'm going to assume that all firms borrow domestically, just for the exercise. And then just to recall this result that I showed previously, how likely a firm is to export is going to depend on how big that firm is in the second period. In the sense that bigger firms are going to be more likely to pay that fixed cost to export. And we can put that in terms of the exchange rate. Bigger firms need a smaller exchange rate for them to find it optimal to export. So what I'm going to show is, okay, let me see which firms have the size such that under a depreciation, they want to export. And mathematically, this is it, but this is algebra. Let me show you graphically. So in our benchmark case, when there's no spread, all firms above a certain threshold in productivity are the ones that are going to find it optimal to export. Because in our benchmark case, since there's no spread, all firms are going to be facing the exact same interest rate domestically. So that means that the only thing that's going to determine the size in the second period is going to be the productivity. When there's a wedge, we're going to find that how big a firm is in the second period might also start to depend on the level of initial capital. Why? Because when there's a spread, there are going to be some firms that in the domestic market neither want to borrow nor to save, because the interest rate is too high to borrow, the savings rate is too low to save. So for these firms to be the certain size such that they find it optimal to export tomorrow depending on exchange rate, doesn't depend on their initial productivity, but rather on the initial level of capital. And also, we're going to see that there were some firms that under the benchmark case would want to export, and now they don't. That it would be like this small rectangle here. So these are going to be the firms that under the benchmark case, they will be facing a lower interest rate. So tomorrow they can be bigger. When there's a positive spread, the interest rate is going to be larger. So now these firms don't want to borrow as much, and they're not going to be high enough to take advantage of the exchange rate. On the other hand, we're going to find these firms that under the benchmark case would not be exporting, and now they do. And the reason is because these firms are going to be firms that are saving. When there's a wedge, the interest rate to save is lower, so they want to save less. If they want to save less, then tomorrow they're going to be bigger, and if they want to be bigger, then they're going to take advantage of the exchange rate to export. And as ROE increases, then we'll find that like these effects increase. So there are going to be less productive firms with initial capital exporting, and more low productivity firms that are going to be exporting. And in general, what we're going to see is that what determines the export decision is going to be more related to the initial level of capital and less related to the productivity. And now let me mix both effects. Okay, sorry. And then, so in this case, if we're just analyzing the export decision, then the exposition to the exchange rate is going to be more direct. If you export, you're better off with a depreciation. If you don't export, depreciation doesn't play any role to you. And now let me mix both effects. Mix both effects in the sense that let me analyze jointly the decision to export and the credit market you tap. So let me, how much time do I have? Like 5 minutes?
No, you have 13 minutes. David.
Okay. I mean, I'm almost done regardless. So if we analyze both decisions, they're going to be like certain levels of exposition. So basically, I mean, certain levels, but we can group in like in 3 groups. The firms that are better off with a depreciation. So these firms that are better off with appreciation are going to be firms that are exporting because they have higher income and are saving abroad. Or some combination, like they are exporting but they tap the domestic credit market, or they're saving abroad and they don't export. There are going to be some firms that they're not exposed to the exchange rate. These are going to be the firms that have no access internationally. So they tap the domestic credit market and they don't export. And they're going to be firms that are negatively exposed. These are going to be the firms that don't export and they borrow from abroad. So let me show you. So now what we're going to analyze is, okay, what's like the aggregate exposition, exchange rate exposition of the economy when ROE changes. So with a greater ROE, what we find is that we're going to find more positively exposed firms, in the sense that we're going to have more firms that are saving in foreign currency. And the reason for this is higher ROE means it's the interest rate to save in the domestic credit market is going to be lower. So more firms are finding it optimal to tap the international credit market. And also we're going to find that more savers export. And the reason why more save versus export is that when firms that want to save face higher costs, either because they face a lower interest rate domestically or they have to pay a fixed cost to access the international credit market, then they're gonna save less and they're gonna be bigger tomorrow. If they're bigger tomorrow, then they're gonna be more likely to export. We also find that there are gonna be more firms that are negatively exposed to exchange rate. So these are firms that with a higher exchange rate, their profits go down. And the reason for this is because we're gonna find more firms borrowing in foreign currency, similar to before. So more firms are gonna be borrowing in foreign currency because the interest rate they will be facing domestically is gonna be a bigger withdrawal. So they're more likely to borrow abroad. And also we want to find that borrowers are less likely to export. And the reason why they're less likely to export is because firms are going to be borrowing with a higher row. They're going to be facing higher costs, either a higher domestic rate or they have to pay the fixed cost to tap the international credit market. So they want to borrow less. And if they want to borrow less, they're going to be smaller tomorrow. And if they're smaller tomorrow, they're less likely to take advantage of the exchange rate. And on net, with a higher row, the economy as a whole is going to be more negatively exposed to exchange rate because precisely the firms that are going to be borrowing are the firms that are more productive. So graphically, so let me just show you a couple of graphs and then I'm done. This will be like a benchmark case. So this will be a benchmark case. So if we combine both the export decision and the credit market decision in a benchmark case, we could find firms that find it optimal to tap the international credit market. So in this graph, what I'm showing you is the firms in the dark color would be the firms that are tapping the domestic credit market. And as ROE increases, we're going to see less firms wanted to tap the credit market, the domestic credit market. In particular, with higher ROE, the firms that will be borrowing are more likely to tap the international credit market, and the firms that are saving are more likely to tap the international credit market. And regarding the export decision, we're going to see that the benchmark case, the export decision is mostly dependent on productivity. Firms above a certain productivity want to export. As ROE increases, the initial level of capital is also playing a role. And the reason is playing a role is because the initial level of capital is going to play a role both to which credit market they want to tap. And also, even if they're still tapping the domestic credit market, then more firms don't want to either borrow or save. And then if we combine both effects, this would be the firms in dark are the firms that are positively exposed to the exchange rate. So this would be firms that both export or are saving abroad in the benchmark case. As ROE increases, sorry, I went down the other way, we're going to see that there are more firms that want to save domestically, and also we're going to see that more firms that are saving that want to export. So these firms in dark color are going to be the firms that will be positively exposed to an exchange rate. And with greater ROE, what we're going to see is that the number of firms that are positively exposed increases. Yes.
In the previous one, those are the firms that you said. What firms are more positively exposed to exchange rate? Those that save abroad.
So this would be
abroad.
this is a benchmark which I think is like is more clear. Firms that are positively exposed will be firms that are either exporting and tapping the domestic credit market, or firms that are saving abroad. And in this benchmark case, we're gonna see like 2 or 3 firms that are doing both. They're saving abroad and exporting. As ROE increases, we're gonna find that there are gonna be some firms that are exporting, but then these firms they're also exporting, but they're also borrowing domestically, so they're not positively exposed. We're gonna see more firms that are borrowing abroad, and we're gonna see more firms that are doing both, exporting and borrowing abroad. Right? And as ROE increases even more, we're gonna find more of this latter. Like these latter firms mean like more firms that are doing both, exporting and borrowing abroad. So we're gonna be much better off under a devaluation. Now let me see the firms. Okay, the firms that are not exposed. So the firms that are not exposed would be the firms that are both tapping the domestic credit market and are not exporting. As ROE increases, we're gonna see that these firms that are not exposed, that are just tapping the domestic credit market, are gonna be fewer, But we're also going to see these other firms. These other firms would be the firms that are borrowing abroad but are also exporting. So like that kind of nets out, like the hedge firms. And then we're going to see, with a positive row, firms that are negatively exposed to exchange rate. So these are the firms that are borrowing abroad and they're not exporting. So in net, what we're going to see is, with less financial development, more firms that are positively exposed, more firms that are negatively exposed, but the firms that are negatively exposed are the firms that are more productive. So net, the economy is more negatively exposed to exchange rate. And like, just to conclude, what I showed you today was a model where the impact of a depreciation depends on financial development. We rationalize why in economies with lower financial development, the depreciation does not have a positive impact on the firm's revenues. And the reason is because with less financial development, we have both more firms positively exposed to the exchange rate, but also more firms negatively exposed to the exchange rate. And the firms that are negatively exposed to the exchange rate are more productive. So net, the economy is worse off under a devaluation. Like, I mean, on net, the economy is more negatively exposed under the devaluation. And then we have our next steps are, okay, let's see numbers. And the reason why I think that quantitatively we might have something is the fact that less financial development in this economy is increasing misallocation in the sense that optimal choices of firms, both credit market and export decision, are depending more on initial capital rather than on productivity. So there's like a source of misallocation there. And if there's a source of misallocation there, we conjecture that quantitatively, this mechanism might have some bite.
Thank you, David. I have a question here. So one thing here is that maybe I'm going wrong, but the complete opposite happens in case of an appreciation in the
Yes.
model, right?
Yes.
Because the exchange rate is exogenous. So in the quantitative part, it could be the same when you do it for infinite periods. But in practice, one could argue that a depreciation comes from an exogenous shock, right? Like a risk shock or whatever. Whereas an appreciation could come from FDI or something that changes the distribution of firm size. And in that case, I mean, this is food for thought, not for this project or whatever, but not necessarily in practice, both an appreciation or a depreciation have symmetric effects. I think it's something you can check in the data easily, you know.
But I mean, so here's the thing, but yeah, it's not obvious. Like I think it's like the result. There's some symmetry. Yeah, we're some symmetry right here, right? I don't think that's bad per se in the sense that you could also have like a negative shock decreasing, if FDI and causing a depreciation or something like that. Right? Like I mean, the two shocks you mentioned, I could also think of like the symmetric case. But there's this thing in the model where the symmetric part, which might be interesting to analyze, which might like make it not so symmetric, and it's the fact that to tap the international credit market, you need to pay the fixed cost regardless of whether you're saving or borrowing, right? So if and that kind of includes a non-symmetry in the sense that since you want to pay you have to pay the fixed cost. That makes that firms that tap the international market more likely to borrow, not to save. You see what I'm saying? So that means, like, if you analyze an appreciation, it might not be the exact mirror of what I just showed you.
I totally agree. My point is that the underlying sources of shocks of depreciations, well, thinking about emerging markets, are usually not the same than of appreciations. And some are more structural and some are more short-term drivers. So in that sense, it could be easy to check in the data what happens under an appreciation when it and then when there's actually an appreciation, and then what happens when there is actually a depreciation. maybe you get nothing. And if you get nothing, well, this is perfect with the model. If you get something that is not symmetric, maybe then it's just something to point out to focus on the depreciation part of the model. I think, but food for thought.
Okay, yeah. No, yeah. No, you're right. That makes sense. That's, yeah, curiosity that we could explore.
More questions or comments?
David, I have a question. I'm Ramiro from the bank. Do you have imports in the model? Even though you're talking about exchange rate changes, don't you need like to model the foreign supply or to include in the model?
So, I mean, we have at this point, we could claim that when you borrow abroad, you're kind of importing capital, right? Tim Kiho says that that's a completely different dynamic and that we should include intermediate inputs. So we're exploring that.
Could be intermediate input, but it could be also in the final product, like the foreign. I mean,
Are you
foreign
mean like in the economy, like
varieties.
economy-wide having imports?
Or, I mean, the same in the industry.
Yeah, but I mean, in that case it would be, I think, like aligned with the comment of kind of how we could endogenize the exchange rate, right? Because I mean, at this point we have no balance of payments, right? Because the exchange rate is exogenous. So like, I find it relevant. I will find it relevant to include imports to have like an endogenous exchange rate somehow. No.
I don't know. I mean, just in the market, I mean, there is an appreciation, and I mean, import become more expensive, less competitive in the market, and you are better off.
But then yeah, let me then double down on my claim. In that, like in our model, we would be seeing that potential in the sense that with an appreciation, like the imports, it's like firms are importing capital, right? When firms borrow from abroad, they're importing capital in that sense. And if there's an appreciation, they have to pay less for that capital. So in that sense, we're already taking this into account.
Okay, thanks.